Sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones hiding in the dark, but the ones that stand right beside you when you think you're alone. It started with the feeling of being watched. David had just moved into a small apartment for work, a quiet place with thin walls and old wooden floors. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him. At first, everything seemed normal, until the first night. As he lay in bed, scrolling on his phone, he caught something in his peripheral vision. A dark figure standing in the corner of his room. His breath hitched. He turned his head sharply, but nothing. The corner was empty. He brushed it off as exhaustion. But the next night, it happened again. This time, he didn't look away immediately. He kept his gaze locked on his phone screen, watching through the reflection. The figure was there, tall, unmoving, its head slightly tilted. His heart pounded as he slowly turned his head. And just like before, gone. The following nights were worse. The figure didn't just stand in the corner anymore. It moved. One night he woke up to the sound of floorboards creaking. He lay still, barely breathing. His eyes darted to the corner, empty. But then, his closet door was open. Just a crack. His pulse pounded in his ears. He knew he had closed it before bed. Something was wrong. The next morning he found long, thin scratches on his bedroom door. He lived alone. No pets. No explanation. He tried telling himself it was his imagination, but the weight of unseen eyes never left him. Then came the worst night of all. He was lying in bed, forcing himself to sleep, when he heard a whisper. Not a word. Not a sentence. Just a breath, drawn out like someone was standing right beside his ear. He froze. His room was ice cold. Then, the bed shifted, like someone sat down at the edge. His body locked up. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He felt pressure on his legs as if someone, or something, was climbing onto the bed, crawling toward him. A deep, guttural voice whispered, "I know you can see me now." David screamed. He bolted from his bed and turned on every light in the apartment, but there was no one there. The scratches on his door were deeper the next morning. He moved out a week later, but the story doesn't end there. A few nights ago, he stayed at a hotel during a business trip. He finally felt safe. He went to bed early, relieved to be somewhere new. But as he turned off the light, he saw something in the corner of the room. Tall, unmoving, head slightly tilted, and then it took a step forward. It was 2:47 a.m. when Thomas first saw him, standing beneath the flickering street light at the end of his driveway. The man didn't move, didn't speak. He only smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched across his pale face like a mask. At first, Thomas thought he was drunk. But then, the man took a single step forward. His smile never wavered. His eyes never blinked. And in that moment, Thomas realized this wasn't a man at all. The true story of the smiling man. This story comes from a real-life encounter shared by a man who remains haunted by what happened that night. Thomas was a regular guy, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood. He worked late shifts, so it wasn't unusual for him to get home in the early hours of the morning. But on one particular night, his routine would be shattered forever. As he parked his car in his driveway, he noticed a figure standing under a streetlight. The man was tall, unnaturally thin, wearing a wrinkled suit that looked decades old. His head was slightly tilted, his grin stretched from ear to ear, like a mannequin frozen in time. Something about that smile felt wrong. Thomas tried to shake off the unease and hurried to his front door. But as he fumbled with his keys, he glanced back, and the man was closer. He hadn't seen him move. The figure now stood halfway up the driveway, still grinning, still motionless. Thomas's heart pounded. He rushed inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. He peered through the peephole, expecting the man to be gone. But he wasn't. He was right outside, smiling, not knocking, not speaking, just standing there. Then, he danced. His movements were erratic, like a puppet with tangled strings. He took exaggerated steps, arms swinging wildly, his grin never fading. He twirled, then suddenly froze. For the next few minutes, he repeated this terrifying performance, a grotesque, silent show, just for Thomas. Then without warning, he sprinted, straight at the door. Thomas stumbled back, expecting the man to crash through. But just as suddenly as he started running, the man stopped, inches from the door. That damn smile still plastered across his face. A wave of nausea and dread washed over Thomas. He called the police, whispering his plea for help. But as he spoke, the smiling man backed away, one slow step at a time, his eyes locked onto Thomas. Then he turned and disappeared into the night. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. No footprints, no security footage, nothing. But Thomas knew what he saw. And worse, he knew the man would be back. Because the next night, at exactly 2:47 a.m., the doorbell rang, and through the peephole, the smiling man was waiting. Once upon a time, in a quiet village surrounded by dark forests, there was an abandoned mansion at the edge of town. Everyone in the village whispered about it, saying it was cursed, but no one knew the full story. One cold, stormy night, three thieves, Jamal, Karim, and Bashir, heard about the mansion. A villager had told them that it was filled with treasures left behind by its rich owners. Greedy for gold, they decided to sneak into the mansion. "Ghosts don't scare me," said Jamal. "Me neither," added Karim. "Let's get the loot and leave," Bashir laughed. With flashlights and a sack, they crept through the forest and reached the mansion. The gate creaked open with a groan, and the wind howled as if warning them to stay away. Inside, the air was icy cold. The walls were covered in cobwebs, and the floorboards creaked under their weight. But the thieves didn't care. They searched room after room until they stumbled upon a large chest in the basement. Jamal opened it eagerly, revealing glittering gold coins, sparkling jewels, and shining goblets. "We're rich!" he exclaimed. But as soon as he said it, the door to the basement slammed shut with a thunderous bang. "Who did that?" Karim shouted, but no one answered. Suddenly, they heard soft whispers echoing in the room. "Thieves! Thieves! You shouldn't have come here." Karim's flashlight flickered, and in the dim light, they saw shadows moving on the walls. They weren't their shadows. Then a raspy voice boomed, "You dare steal what is not yours!" The chest slammed shut by itself, and a ghostly figure appeared, floating above them. It was the ghost of the mansion's owner, a stern-looking man with glowing red eyes. "You will pay the price for your greed," the ghost hissed. The thieves screamed and ran for the door, but no matter how fast they ran, the hallway stretched endlessly. Paintings on the walls began to move, and the eyes of the people in the paintings followed them. Karim tripped and fell, but when Jamal and Bashir turned to help him, he was gone. All that was left was his flashlight spinning on the ground. "Let's get out of here," Bashir yelled. They finally burst out of the mansion, panting and terrified. But something was strange. They looked around and saw that they weren't in the forest anymore. The mansion was gone. Instead, they were standing in the middle of a graveyard with three open graves in front of them. Terrified, they realized the gravestones had their names carved on them. From that day on, no one ever saw the three thieves again. Some say their screams can still be heard on stormy nights near the old graveyard. And the mansion, it's still waiting, with its treasures, for the next greedy soul to enter. Moral: greed leads to trouble, and stealing can come at a terrible price.